Hello and welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host TJ Mabardi. Today we are going to be starting to get into some of the Super Bowl talks between the 49ers and the Chiefs now that that is set. So we're going to start off by talking about some of the biggest storylines surrounding the game going into it, at least as of 2 weeks out. We're then going to take that conversation and sort of develop it into more of a Chiefs-centric segment where we talk about what another Super Bowl championship would do for Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid, and this Chiefs organization. Then we are going to put some final thoughts on the Lions and the Ravens. I know that don't want to harp on them too long necessarily, but it's going to be a couple weeks before we actually get this final Super Bowl matchup. And these two franchises between Detroit and Baltimore are obviously very prideful and put together incredible seasons. And we're just going to sort of wrap up thoughts on them before finally getting to the NBA. And it was an absolutely bonkers night last night across the association. Lots of games and lots of very close games at that. So it was a lot of fun. Before we get into the show today, just a reminder to like and follow. And if any of you have live questions, remember to use the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker throughout the show to help get your questions the priority they deserve and to make this as interactive of a show as possible. Without further ado, getting into our first segment here, talking about the biggest headlines from the upcoming Super Bowl 58. So this obviously is a rematch of the Super Bowl just a handful of years ago during the 2019 and 20 season where these two teams matched up in the Super Bowl, and Patrick Mahomes won his first Super Bowl to start of kickoff his run here. Of course, had an MVP by then, had a classic playoff game against Tom Brady, the GOAT, the one that Mahomes, I mean, the reality is he's already chasing Brady in some ways. And again, I'm not trying to get too much into that now because we will be getting to that in the second segment. But a very important Super Bowl, really, for both of these franchises. I think that sort of to start off this conversation, talking about the 49ers here, I mean, in that 2020 Super Bowl, it was a lot of these same young players. There was George Kittle, there was Nick Bosa, there are those almost iconic clips of them after the game crying, George Kittle promising that he was going to come back with vengeance and make it back to this spot, and he did, and he has an opportunity along with that 49ers team to take down the team that knocked them out of it just those handful of years ago in the Chiefs. I think that even though obviously this Chiefs or this 49ers roster feels like they have a lot to prove, I think that the number one person that would benefit from a win here is head coach Kyle Shanahan. We have sort of touched on it in the coming weeks about just how important a Super Bowl win would mean for him and his legacy after, despite being extremely accomplished up to this point, still having some sort of negative connotation and reputations surrounding him as far as being able to win in the big spots. And here he is again. I think that he has to be, at least of my time coming up as a football fan, but really probably of all time, one of the most accomplished guys to not win a Super Bowl as far as coaching goes, dating back to the really good season that he put together with Atlanta as their offensive coordinator in 2016 and 17, helping to put together this unbelievable offensive season for the team as a whole, and Matt Ryan specifically helping him to win an MVP award, the one of his career, reaching the Super Bowl, building up this massive lead, and then ultimately falling short in the 28-3 collapse, which is sort of where it all started to stem from, not running the ball enough, being too pass happy. There was, of course, the strip sack that came in a costly moment for them in that second half that sort of helped ignite the comeback. He's now reached 4 of the past NFC Championship games as the 49ers head coach, and he reached the Super Bowl in 2020, like we talked about. And then after building up the 20-10 lead, they fall short, allow 21 consecutive points, can't get it done on offense, and obviously a lot of that game came with the missed throw by Jimmy Garoppolo on their final drive, overthrowing his receiver on a crucial down, which sort of leads us into this second storyline of Brock Purdy and how he sort of fits into this role. You're going to be hearing all about the Mr. Irrelevant. It really surrounded him for the majority of the playoff push last season, but at this point, we just accepted him for who he was. And the draft status, it was thrown out there every once in a while. And most of the time when it was more so about kind of the group of people that were trying to bring him down, I would say. And he has exceeded expectations, obviously. And he's brought his team to this big moment. And I think that now we're going to get maybe another taste about Brock Purdy being the last pick in his draft class a couple years ago. So be prepared for that. I think that it is very interesting. Yesterday on this show, we had a 49ers fan in the chat talking about how much of an upgrade and how the Chiefs should be scared because instead of Jimmy Garoppolo being at quarterback, it is Brock Purdy. Now, I do definitely think that Purdy is better, but I think that the question is just how much better is sort of what's surrounding this. Now, obviously, he and Kyle Shanahan and this 49ers team has been a little uncharacteristic of sorts in coming back after some slow starts the past couple weeks, which is huge. We obviously saw across the bracket in the AFC what happens when you have a team that doesn't have that experience coming back from a deficit. So this is good, but it is going to be huge, I think, for the 49ers in this game not to get out to a slow start, because I think that this Chiefs defense is too good, and to come back on like that, to allow big plays and allow the script to flip a little bit. And then on the other side, I think that the Chiefs offense is too good to allow the 49ers the opportunities such as fumbling on your own 25-yard line and giving you that short field position. I think that the 49ers are going to have to come out hot and starting right, and this is something between Brock Purdy and between Kyle Shanahan and his play calling of being able to answer the moment. I thought that Shanahan was really impressive coming out in that second half after struggling as much as they did in the first half, getting back to their script, using Deebo Samuel, who has been their number one weapon, has been such a massive part of their offense all season, and he was obviously maybe a little limited in practice throughout the week, but at that point, the moment called for, we need to use our best weapon, and he did so. So I think that first quarter, first half is going to be just about as crucial as any minutes in the entire game for the 49ers here. Another storyline that I think is going to obviously in the sports world and in the entertainment world and just the news in general, love it or hate it, Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift is a very significant story as far as the culture-wise. Now, I know that the majority of football fans obviously don't want to hear anything more about it, so I'll try and be brief here, obviously, but there was a very interesting report that just came out from the front office sports, where they said they went through data and found that since Taylor Swift first came to a Chiefs game, the NFL has made an extra $331 million in revenue. It sounds a little extreme. Obviously, the Kelce jersey sales and memorabilia, stuff like that, has to contribute some to that. The ticket prices for any games that Taylor Swift was there for definitely was more expensive. I don't know about $331 million, and again, it was front office sports that did this. They used data from Apex Marketing Group. I haven't actually went through the study because I myself don't really care enough to dive into Taylor Swift any more than we are sort of shown it as a football community at this point. I don't get too upset with it at this point. It's just whatever, but you do have to acknowledge that it has very much increased and helped the NFL based off of female viewership and some of those jersey and memorabilia sales as well. You already have Swiftie fans tracking the flights because I think that she has a concert the day before or something like that. So if you haven't heard enough about Taylor Swift up to this point, just buckle yourself in, because I don't think that we're done with it by any means now that she's going to be here. And the latter half of these storylines, I'll just sort of briefly touch on it now because we are going to shortly be hitting a break and getting more in depth about it. But it comes down to all of this talk about the Chiefs, Mahomes, Andy Reid, and whether or not this can be considered a Chiefs dynasty. Quickly, I will give my thoughts in the fact that I think across all sports, typically the number is 3 as far as championships you have to reach to officially be considered a dynasty. I consider the Warriors a dynasty. Patriots are a dynasty in the 2000s. In the 2000s, really, it's up to you whether you want to consider the Patriots dynasty as a full-blown thing or if it was a first dynasty early in the 2000s and another one in the 2010s. But obviously now they are reaching their 4th Super Bowl in 5 years, 6 years. 6 years is how long Mahomes has been the starting quarterback, but obviously didn't reach in 2018. So I guess that would make it 4 in 5 years, which is a tremendous mark of its own. And obviously if this sort of dominance keeps up and they weren't to win a Super Bowl but keep reaching it, I think that you can maybe be a little more lenient on that third championship rule that I have. But obviously if they win the Super Bowl this year, I think it's solidified. I don't think that there's really much of an argument that this should officially be classified as a dynasty. Now, what that means for the organization and for their players involved, we will get more to on the other side of this break. So be sure to stick with us and we will get into all of that.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We just wrapped up talking about some of these initial storylines that are surrounding the Super Bowl 58 matchup between the 49ers and the Chiefs, and I withheld a little bit on talking about the Chiefs for a lot of this because now in this segment we are going to be getting into the specifics of how would a Super Bowl win affect the Chiefs and the Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid duo going forward as far as legacy-wise. So, obviously, Patrick Mahomes, brief little history lesson here. 6 seasons as a starter. He has appeared in 6 consecutive AFC Championship games and now is reaching his 4th Super Bowl. Obviously, in those championship games, he is 4-2, lost to Tom Brady, the greatest quarterback of all time, in his first appearance, and then lost to Joe Burrow a couple years ago on the Bengals run. So, now looking to win his 3rd ring. I think that this Super Bowl would far and away be the most significant up to this point. Obviously, the first championship is, in a lot of cases, the most important because you can't have a second or third without the first. But for a talent such as Patrick Mahomes, and talking about a guy that, despite being as young as he is, already being considered for the greatest of all time conversations, I think that this is the one that could really set him apart. I think that in a lot of people's eyes, especially around my age, a lot of Chiefs fans, obviously, people are already sort of clamoring to make him the greatest quarterback of all time. But I think that this one just means that much extra because of the fact that it would be a repeated championship. And I have sort of had this rule myself and it shouldn't be that surprising as I am a Patriots fan, but I have personally had a rule where at the beginning of every season, when I am picking who I think is going to win the Super Bowl just on a long shot, it's never the team that just won the year prior, because that doesn't happen. As long as I've been alive, born in 2001, it has happened 2 times in my lifetime. Both times were the New England Patriots, where the greatest coach of all time and the greatest quarterback of all time were paired together, and they were paired together and they were able to overcome the odds. That's not a normal thing. The way that the NFL is typically run is there's tons of roster turnover in between seasons because of the cap situation, the hard cap. I know that in years past there, and recently at least, there's been a lot of people saying, oh, well, the salary cap doesn't exist, which, while there are definitely loopholes, that's still not totally true. And we saw the Chiefs have to make the massive sacrifice of trading their number 1 receiver, maybe the best receiver in the league, in Tyreek Hill, to a conference rival because of the fact that they had to pay their other guys. They had to pay Patrick Mahomes the contract that he did. Travis Kelce was already on a very large contract. And you can't be paying just 3 players alone 50% of your salary cap, because how are you going to operate as a franchise going forward? They knew that was the case, so they did sort of the unthinkable at the time, which was trading Tyreek Hill. Usually, for the majority of teams, that would sort of disrupt the cohesion of the group, losing your number 1 threat. And takes a little bit to retool in some ways. But for the Chiefs, they have Patrick Mahomes, who is obviously this generational talent, and still had Kelsey too, of course, and Kelsey was absolutely massive for them in that Super Bowl run last season. And this year, even while he was sort of banged up and dealing with injuries and he doesn't quite look the same athletically, he is still producing big time for them. Had a massive game against the Ravens, 11 catches on 11 targets, 116 yards, and a touchdown. So I think that when you look at the possibility of the Chiefs repeating here, and you go back in history, there are only 8 teams that have ever repeated in Super Bowl history. It was the Packers doing so in the first 2 Super Bowls. There were a couple instances from 1970 to 1980 of them, of a couple different franchises. You get the deal. A lot of these teams were in the past, and it's not the same NFL where there are more teams that are looking to sign your players, can, sort of try and steal off your best players and such. And, you saw it with the Eagles last year. They were still a good roster this season. I know that things really fell apart for them towards the end, but you lose your top 2 tacklers on defense. You lose your best defensive lineman in Javon Hargrave. You lose your leading rusher from last season in Miles Sanders. It's just all of this turnover can be so hard to manage, and yet somehow the Chiefs keep doing it year after year. So top to bottom, everybody there deserves credit. Where does Patrick Mahomes rank in all-time quarterbacks if he wins a Super Bowl this season? That would be his 3rd. If he wins in these coming Sundays, that pushes him solely to 3rd all-time in quarterback playoff wins. He just tied a handful of other names this year. Peyton Manning, Steve Young, John Elway, Terry Bradshaw. He just tied them all at 14 in significantly less games already at a significantly younger age. Now moving forward, he has the potential to pass Peyton Manning in both wins and rings, and I think that it's kind of hard to put these other guys. Obviously, they have some of the longevity to support them as far as, full resumes. Patrick Mahomes hasn't had necessarily the years to be awarded as many MVP awards, such as a Peyton Manning or something like that, but I do think that you probably push Mahomes into that tier with Tom Brady and Joe Montana. And I think that he's probably already on the Mount Rushmore, if that's not crazy to say. And that would put him into, I think, solidified top 3 all time. And then I think that what puts, obviously, Brady and Montana above Mahomes at this point is a little bit longevity based, but that's because regular season and all-time stats, that's one thing, but it is continuously winning. Now, if you look at specifically the Brady and Mahomes argument, Brady was sort of picked up by his defense in those early years. He wasn't necessarily the full driving force for the Patriots in those early games. Even 2018, when he won his final Super Bowl with the Patriots, yes, he went on to win with the Buccaneers as well, but specifically in 2018 with the Patriots, they only scored 13 points in the Super Bowl. But he made the big play, the throw down the field and the seam to Gronk, that sort of ignited that one touchdown. And yes, obviously, having the greatest coach of all time and Bill Belichick helps, because he shut down Sean McVay's revolutionary offense that year. But that also sort of takes me into the conversation here of Andy Reid, where it's just not possible for one person single-handedly to win a Super Bowl. So their front office deserves credit. Andy Reid deserves loads of credit as well, based off of this would put him in an elite group as far as I think it's currently 4 head coaches in NFL history it is 4 coaches in NFL history have 3 or more Super Bowl wins. Andy Reid is now looking for his 3rd as a head coach. That would put him in 1 of 5 and very rarefied air for someone that maybe had a little bit of bumps and bruises. The Philadelphia tenure didn't go quite as well as maybe hoped. Still some success there, but he was, if you remember, towards the end of that stretch, very much, in my opinion, scapegoated for the lack of success for a franchise that they now since have a Super Bowl, but hadn't really accomplished much at all in the history of their organization. And Andy Reid comes in, he has some early success with Alex Smith, but then sort of helps bridge that gap between Alex Smith, a very good all-time quarterback, not Hall of Fame level, but one of the most solidified starters without being exceptional, I think, almost, in Alex Smith, who was very good at times, but he was just never able to fully elevate his team in that level, had a lack of postseason success, one of the worst winning percentages. I know wins aren't fully a quarterback stat, but one of the worst winning percentages in the postseason history for a quarterback, into Patrick Mahomes, who is this all-time talent. And I think that the two of them in Mahomes and Reid merging together, it was just such a perfect fit. Reid, who what sort of went under the radar as one of these other revolutionary offensive-minded guys, and then finally having his muse almost in this talent of Mahomes to be able to fully play out what he was wanting the team to look like. And it just allows them to move around a lot of pieces, obviously, such as trading a Tyreek Hill and still being able to have success. What does Mahomes have to do to surpass the Montana and the Brady? I don't think there's anything he can do this season. He can get himself on that tier. And to be on that tier alone is a ridiculous thought, because when Tom Brady retired with 7 Super Bowls, I obviously grew up in this Brady era. I never got to watch a Montana, but I'm sure there was a time when Montana was 6-0 in Super Bowls, and it's like nobody can ever touch this guy. Jerry Rice had the record at the time, obviously playing with Montana and a little bit Steve Young as well, but having this thought to be unbreakable record of most postseason receptions in NFL history. We just saw that get broken by a Patrick Mahomes-led offense to his number one weapon in Travis Kelce. When Brady finishes with that 7th, immediately the thought is there's no way anybody can ever touch this guy. And yet here we are looking at a 28, I believe, year-old Patrick Mahomes, who's looking to be 3-1 in Super Bowls, have the 3rd most quarterback playoff wins in NFL history just 6 years into starting. It is almost unbelievable. And I think that the repeat would put him in such rarefied air that nobody at this point, it's not even a debate. We saw Lamar Jackson call Patrick Mahomes a Hall of Famer already heading into this past weekend, and nobody really batted an eye, because it's true, if Patrick Mahomes doesn't take another snap in his career, he's already probably a first ballot Hall of Famer. And from here on the end of Patrick Mahomes' career, it's trying to sustain that for as long as possible. And for him, really, it's about championships. And that's what this year is about. It's what every year coming forward will be about. Sure, the MVPs would be nice and some of these passing stats, but ultimately, obviously, we see the league expanding to 17 game seasons, passing more often throughout the season, the increase of the passing game over the years, the sort of loss of the true dominant running backs. So the stat books can get a little bit messy. One thing that can never be taken away from you is being a champion. That's what Patrick Mahomes has been to start his career, and we're going to see how long he can sustain this highest level of success going forward. So we're obviously going to be doing a lot more on the Chiefs, the 49ers, and this Super Bowl matchup going forward. But before we do all that, I think that it's time to just take one last look on the Lions and the Ravens. Had a little bit of technical issues talking about the Ravens yesterday. Just want to close the book on these two franchises that suffered very emotional losses over the weekend and just sort of wrap up the talks on them until we get into further off-season conversations later this season. But now we are going to be taking a quick break. We will be back after that with Lions and Ravens talk, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We just wrapped up talking about some of these early storylines surrounding the Super Bowl, from what it looks like for head coach Kyle Shanahan and whether or not he can have his redemption after a little bit of a narrative surrounding him that he can't win the big games has been surrounding him since 2017. We talked about what it would mean for Mahomes, Reid, and the Chiefs for if they were to win a Super Bowl this year. But as we continue to talk about them over the coming weeks, I do want to sort of close the chapter on the 2023-24 season for the Lions and the Ravens. These two teams lost, obviously, in the championship weekend, and it felt like America, for the most part, unless you had any sort of personal affinity to the Chiefs and the Niners, these were the two teams that people were rooting for. Everybody loves the underdog story, and I know that the Ravens were actually favored in this game somewhat significantly by kickoff. It was the idea of knocking down these two Goliaths of sort of the 49ers and the Chiefs. The Niners, one of the greatest franchises in the history of the NFL, have been such a prominent team in the NFC Championship game of the past few years, and had made it to a Super Bowl where they played the Chiefs, who are now in the AFC Championship game every year and already have a couple Super Bowls, including last season. So these two teams in the Lions and the Ravens were sort of America's pick, and they suffered some pretty heartbreaking losses. And I don't want to be cynical and, get on their cases too much, but I just sort of want to take a look at where did these two teams go from here after kind of being the ones that come up on the short end, as they had the more to lose, I should say, than their respective counterparts and the champions of their conferences. So the Ravens obviously had a chance to get the Chiefs in a year where they have home field advantage and the Chiefs seemed vulnerable, but their MVP-led offense just couldn't get enough done. The Lions making it to the NFC Championship game, the franchise's first conference championship game since 1991. still yet to make it to the Super Bowl, and they had a 17-point lead going into halftime. That obviously falls apart, marking the largest collapse in NFC Championship history. So, moving forward for these teams, what is the likelihood they can find themselves in this same position, like hopefully for them, better results, but in this position next year? It's interesting to ask because Dan Campbell, we mentioned it on the show yesterday, immediately when he came out for his post-game press conference, he said that what he told his locker room was this may have been our only shot. And he went on to explain the reality of the NFL, which is once you reach this stage of the championship weekend game and you're a participant in that, you're not sneaking up on anybody anymore. You know, last year, the Lions sort of turned it around late in the year. They had that big final win on Sunday Night Football of being able to knock out their division rival out of the playoffs and sort of end their season on a high note despite not making the playoffs themselves. And then coming into this year, they were sort of that fun buzz team for a while, talking about the fact that they are a fun team, these scrappy Lions. Dan Campbell, he's a crazy person, but he has that locker room bought in, and they were just a fun story for a while, and they had some big wins, and they had some losses, like when they lost to the Ravens, and they got pummeled by them, and they lose a close one to the Dallas Cowboys, and despite putting together a good season, a lot of people sort of viewed them as a second-tier franchise within the NFC contenders. And the idea of the Detroit Lions of all franchises being able to put together a Super Bowl run just didn't really seem that realistic, and here they were just so close to being able to do so. So, for both teams, they're going to have targets on their back. They're not going to catch anybody off guard. They know how talented the players on the roster are, the buy-in from the coaches. I think, say what you want about Dan Campbell because of his fourth down decisions, still probably one of the best coaches in the NFL. Maybe a little bit of a statement on the general consensus of a lot of these head coaches, but again, I think the buy-in and having the locker room is the first thing you have to do to have success. Dan Campbell has more than enough showed that he can do that. The Lions' upcoming free agents, just to sort of put into perspective what their roster is going to look like next season. It's not as bad as you may think because they've been incredible drafting over the past couple years, including this year where they were so heavily scrutinized for drafting Jahmyr Gibbs in the early teens. It was 12th or 13th. Then you take Jack Campbell, who maybe wasn't quite as high on a lot of draft experts' boards. They go out, they get Laporta, they get Brian Branch. All four of those players in the first two rounds were home run hits, is maybe a little aggressive, but all of them were key contributors for them this season, were making plays in the regular season and playoffs and got them to the NFC Championship game. So already four starters there that they have locked down. Aleem McNeil was a third-round pick a couple years ago. He's developed into a massive piece for them. Aiden Hutchinson, obviously the second overall pick from a couple drafts ago, the 2022 draft. So they've done a very good job of homegrown talent and getting guys on their books long term. So the upcoming free agents for them, all of that being said, it is two starting linemen. They have both of their starting guards, Graham Glasgow and Jonah Jackson. Jonah Jackson missed the NFC Championship game with an injury. The offensive line, obviously, a massive part of the Detroit Lions. So it's going to be pretty crucial for them to address that situation one way or another. Vaitai, I'm not even going to try and pronounce his first name right now. He started for them a couple years, but he was dealing with injuries, and then he didn't end up working his way back into the starting role. He is also an expiring free agent, so they're going to have to figure something out there. Josh Reynolds, I know he might not be the most popular guy in Detroit after a couple of crucial drops in this past game, but he had a good season for them, over 600 yards, 5 touchdowns in the regular season. He had 80 in their playoff, 80 receiving yards, that is, in their playoff game against the Rams, and a touchdown the week after against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and then some defenders, Jerry Jacobs, CJ Gardner-Johnson, and Benito Jones. So, a handful of starters, but ultimately nobody extremely prominent for them. I think that this offseason, the conversation more stems around the two leaders of their offense that are going into expiring contracts next season. That is quarterback Jared Goff and stud wide receiver Amon-Ra St. Brown. They're both coming up on the final years of their deals, and you're going to have to pay them, probably extend them this offseason, I would assume. Amon-Ra, it's a no-brainer for me. You have to bring that guy back. And then Jared Goff, I think at this point, he's probably done everything you have asked him to do. And, I actually didn't mind the pick of Hendon Hooker in the prior draft, where I'm like, oh, this is a good job where Hooker, a little bit of an older guy coming off of an injury. Jared Goff is the perfect bridge quarterback, but I think Goff has shown that he's more than that at this point. He was very good in their playoff run and probably going to be making a lot of money come this next payday, but I think that it's warranted. And then more big news for the Rams came today, where their offensive coordinator, Ben Johnson, informed the Seahawks and Commanders he plans to stay with the Lions. He was a hot head coaching candidate, but he said he wants to come back and win a Super Bowl for the Lions. Gotta love that if you're a Lions fan. I think that is huge. Briefly touching on the Ravens here. They have a handful of pretty significant upcoming free agents. Patrick Queen, who's coming off of his rookie deal, one of the best young players at his linebacker position. All-pro defensive tackle Justin Madubuike is an upcoming free agent. Some more key defenders between Jadeveon Clowney, Geno Stone, Ronald Darby, and Kyle Van Noy. Both of their starting guards, John Simpson and Kevin Zeitler. And some of their complementary offensive guys, Gus Edwards, OBJ, and Nelson Aguilar. So, it's a lot of names that I just named right there, and a lot of guys that played very significant minutes for them this season. Now, you have to have faith in the infrastructure of John Harbaugh and Lamar Jackson, who Lamar, soon to be two-time MVP Lamar Jackson, despite the playoff shortcomings, you have to have faith that that core can bring you back to a similar position. This was far and away the most open the AFC has been for them up to this point. Across their division in the AFC North, excluding Lamar, the most amount of games played from a starting quarterback was just 12, with Kenny Pickett starting that for the Steelers. Joe Burrow only started 10. Deshaun Watson started 6. So the AFC North was wide open for them. The Chiefs seemed extremely vulnerable even as late as December, where they get stonewalled by the Raiders and their offense looks terrible. And Baltimore, the city, is now hosting their first AFC championship game since 1971, when the team playing wasn't even the Baltimore Ravens franchise, it was the Baltimore Colts. And you lose that game. You hope that, they still have a handful of talented young players, and I'm sure they're going to be able to bring back some of the likes of Patrick Queen. You have to bring back Justin Madubuike, I think, is very important to bring back. And Geno Stone has been a huge pickup for them. Took him in the 7th round a few years ago, and he has been extremely valuable. I know you have Kyle Hamilton as another safety, so maybe you feel like you can try and maybe spend that money at a different position, but I like Geno Stone a lot myself. Now, you hope that Zay Flowers is just going to get better. He had a very impressive rookie season. Hope that he gets better, maybe a little bit more mature as well. You still have Isaiah Likely and Mark Andrews through next season, so can try and put some extra receiver talent around Lamar Jackson. We saw how much better he was when he had a legitimate number one receiver. There's plenty of talent on both sides of the ball. But again, you have to look at this year a little bit and be like, how did we let that one slip away? And I think that myself and a lot of people know Lamar wasn't great in the second half, but it really felt like if they could redo that game as far as play calling, we definitely could have seen a different result. But that's not how it works. It's a one and done situation in the NFL, which is what makes it so chaotic and yet so fun at the same time. So those are my final thoughts on both of these teams. I'm sure that they will be back in some capacity next season, and we'll be getting more into expectations for them and all of that. One last note on the Ravens. Mike McDonald is interviewing for these head coaching positions, so we'll see whether or not they have their defensive coordinator for next season. But that is all for those two teams right now. We're going to be taking one last final break here, and when we come back on the other side, we are going to be talking about the NBA. That was it was nuts last night. If you didn't watch and you are a basketball fan, I feel a little bit bad for you because it was a lot of fun. So one final break and we will be back and talking about the NBA. Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Final segment here. I'm actually really looking forward to talking about this one. We just finished up some thoughts on the NFL, from Super Bowl 58 storylines to the Chiefs and the legacy sort of stuff that weighs on with them winning this year's Super Bowl, and then finally closing the page on the 2023-2024 season for the AFC and NFC runner-ups in the Lions and the Ravens. Now we are going to be moving on to a different sport, going to the NBA, and just sort of doing a little bit of a whip around, covering all of the madness from last night. There were 12 games that took place. No free ads here. I don't know if the NBA app has this show called Crunch Time. Highly recommend it. It is free. This is not an ad, but it does a really good job of covering all the different games on nights like last night, where there's a lot of action going on. So was able to keep up with it for the most part. Had my couple other screens to go along with it to make sure that I got everything. But of those 12 games, 7 of which came down to clutch minutes, which counts as a 5-point or fewer game in the final 5 minutes of the game. So was a lot of high intensity juiced action going on in that one. First off, there was Doc Rivers' coaching debut with the Milwaukee Bucks. They lost to defending champion Denver Nuggets. This game was in Denver. The Bucks fall 113-107. So this was a very respectable effort from Doc Rivers and the Bucks, who came to play in this one, but obviously an incredibly difficult matchup to start off this tenure with. Especially when Jamal Murray is feeling himself, he's just as as hot of a heat check shooter there is in the NBA. He was phenomenal. I think that if there's any bit of a concern for the Bucks in this one, it's the fact that the Nuggets only hit 4 3-pointers. They were 4 of 18. The Bucks were 16 of 39. So the Bucks shot 21 more 3-pointers and hit 12 more, but they still lost. They still allowed 113 points. 113 points isn't by any means egregious, but I would say to allow 101 non-3-pointer points in a game, that's a pretty bad mark. And down the stretch, it was just anytime that the Nuggets were going in this one-on-one action, they were really getting what they wanted. I think that sort of talked about it in the past with the Bucks. Their backcourt between Damian Lillard and Malik Beasley, they need some sort of an upgrade, I think, as far as a defensive guard to pair with Dame. Now, Malik Beasley's an unbelievable shooter. He's been better on defense, I think, this year than he has in the past. But I don't think it's a lack of effort thing. And we'll see. It's hard for Doc Rivers to, sort of establish this brand new defensive identity and strategy to help cover up for their little bit of lack of point of attack defenders in one game. But still remains to be a little bit seen. I think that it is a liability for this Bucks team, and I would still consider them contenders. Some people want to write them off because of the weird way that this season has gone, but they're still the second seed in the Eastern Conference despite the loss. So, I think the Doc can get them on the right track, but I do think that they're maybe a perimeter guard away from really being taken quite as seriously as they should be when you have a combination of Dame and Giannis. And again, I still think that Brook Lopez doesn't get enough credit for the defender that he was. He was also pretty good on offense last night as well, hitting threes. So moving on to the Western Conference matchup here, it was a battle between the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Oklahoma City Thunder. At the time, the top 2 seeds in the West, now with the Nuggets winning last night and the Timberwolves coming out on top. In this one, OKC actually dropped to the 3rd seed. Ultimately, we're not even at the All-Star break, so it's not like seeding matters all too much, but a matchup between 2 of these hot and young teams in the Western Conference that are hoping to make a run this season. SGA had his 7th consecutive game with 30 or more points. He had 37 in this one. He really is so unbelievable. I myself, hand up, think that I got a little bit caught up in the Tyrese Halliburton hype earlier in the season. I still love Tyrese Halliburton. Everything that I said about him at the time, I stand by. I think he's incredible. SGA is just so good, though. And I think that, I think he's probably the best point guard in the league. Steph Curry, you probably, if you're playing a playoff series today, you're likely taking Steph Curry over anybody else. But I think that SGA is the future. He is unbelievable. He does everything you need him to do, from scoring, from perimeter shooting to driving, getting to the free throw line. He can play make. He can create off of the dribble. He can defend. He just does it all. He is so good. That being said, Thunder do lose in this one. Anthony Edwards had a good game on the other end, and Minnesota just made more plays down the stretch of the game. A little bit of a cliche, but that is the case. I think that if there's a lesson for the Thunder in this one coming off of the loss, I do think that they need more size. I think they need somebody else to pair with Chet and be a little bit of Chet relief in big moments, because he struggled in this one. It seems like that is typically the case when they play these big and or physical teams. And I like him a lot, but he's sort of like Wemby, great perimeter, or great interior defender, I should say, and does a lot of the right things, makes the right plays, can help space, but he still isn't that big necessarily physically. He's tall, he's lanky, but he can get pushed around a little bit. Rudy Gobert put him on a little bit of a poster last night, physicaled him up, and he struggled on offense. He wasn't quite as effective on defense. I think that they should be looking to pick up somebody else. I think Nick Claxton would be a great fit for them, trading for him from the Nets. After last night, when we're about to get into the Cavaliers, I really liked the idea of them trying to work out a trade with the Cavs to try and poach one of Jarrett Allen or Evan Mobley, where I think that it's a little bit redundant there in Cleveland. Again, about to get onto them, who have been unbelievable. Even a Daniel Gafford from the Washington Wizards, I think, would be an upgrade as far as bench center minutes. They didn't have Chet last year. Keep in mind the fact that in the play-in tournament, which they made, they did not play any center minutes. 0, which is unbelievable. And now they have Chet, which is great, but you're going to be asking him to go up against the Timberwolves, Anthony Davis, and the Lakers, a very physical Warriors team potentially. And I think that Jokic, of course, I don't know how that was my fourth mention, but you're going to need some more size and physicality there, I think. On the note of the Cavs, this was Evan Mobley's first game back, and the Cavs are just so hot right now, playing the LA Clippers, who have been just about the best team in the NBA for the past month, had just blown out the Boston Celtics, the best team in the East, a few days earlier. And this was another game that was close, but it was the Cavs pulling away late. Donovan Mitchell, he struggled from 3, but he finished with 28 and 12. Jarrett Allen was 20 and 17. This Cavs team cannot be stopped right now. It's crazy the amount of production that Donovan Mitchell single-handedly holding it down in, yes, Mobley's absence, but also Darius Garland, their true point guard, is getting out of the likes of Dean Wade, Sam Merrill. I think that Max Strus and Georges Niang have been massive additions, surprisingly enough, which I did not see coming. I thought that they were, fine around the perimeter pieces, and that's still kind of what they are, but there are some really crazy efficiency net ratings between some of these Donovan Mitchell lineups that I'm sure we'll be getting more into a little bit more as time comes. Finishing off with some of these last storylines, the Hospital Grizzlies took the Kings to a close game, gave them a ran for their money. This was a little bit of a wild story. Memphis went into the game with 11 players injured. They only had 7 on the active roster available to play to enter the day. And the minimum allowed to play in an NBA game is 8. So they had to sign Matthew Hurt to a 10-day contract in order to be eligible to play in this game. He actually scored 10 points for them off the bench. Scottie Pippen Jr., he gave some pretty good minutes there. They're just such a weird team, the Grizzlies are, with all of the injuries that they've faced, and yet they compete really well. I think that Taylor Jenkins, their head coach, is doing a very good job with them. We had a shootout between the Mavs and the Magic. The Mavs trailed big for the first half, but they went on a huge run in the third quarter. And then from there, it was just such a fun shootout between the two. It was Luka Doncic versus Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner. It was just a back and forth. There was a stretch of a few minutes there in the fourth quarter where neither team could miss. Luka had a slow start as the Mavs trailed, but he finishes with 45, 15, and 9. Tim Hardaway Jr. with another huge game as well. Still can't decide whether I want him or Malik Monk as my 6th man of the year, but THJ is making an argument, that's for sure. And then the Orlando duo combined for 57. Final game I have notes on, the Boston Celtics came back at home by 10 points in the fourth quarter to beat the New Orleans Pelicans. It was a really slow start on offense as far as shot making wise, which sort of, with the Celtics, a little bit too often leads to them playing not ideal defense. I think that a lot of the time, and it's not the Celtics alone that are guilty of this, but the two sides of the ball are very much intertwined for them, and they were getting pushed around a little bit. New Orleans, obviously a good team and a physical team at that. Drew Holiday had a really good game for them. He was huge in the third quarter to try and help stabilize them, playing against his former team in the Pelicans. And then Derek White and Jason Tatum down the stretch were just unbelievable. 13 points for Derek White. That's my all-star there. And 14 for Jason Tatum. The big thing for the Pelicans here is they still continue to struggle in these close games at the end. A lot of turnovers for them, which has been a recurring theme. So I like watching the Pelicans a lot. I think they're a very talented team. Brandon Ingram was doing just about everything that he could for a stretch there to hold on to that fourth quarter lead, but they fall short. So that is all I have time for today. Thank you very much for tuning in to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I've been your host, TJ Mabarty. Remember to like and follow to keep up with my show, as well as all of the other great shows that we have here at the GSMC Sports Network and the GSMC Podcast Network. We will be back tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Do not miss it.